Hello and welcome back to Morganza, and the third and final part of my conversation with the famed, multi-talented Liverpudlian Beatles historian David Bedford. Be sure to check out parts 1 and 2 of our discussion if you haven't already, because they were mind-blowing. And the flabbergasting continues here in part 3, as David continues to guide us through the twists and turns of his research into the history of the Beatles in Liverpool.
So your new book, The Beatles What If, I imagine you go into some of those moments when everything could have turned out completely different.
Well, yeah, and the whole idea started when I was working on Liverpool. Of just the amazing coincidence of Ivan Vaughan. That without Ivan Vaughan, you don't get John and Paul, you don't get the Beatles.
That is quite a story.
And it's mad. So John is taken to live with his Aunt Mimi from the age of 5. The first lad he meets is Ivan. They go to the same primary school, Dovedale, which is where my girls went. Ivan's the year behind John. They became best mates, and there's a little gang. It's John, Ivan Vaughan, Pete Shotton, Nigel Wally. They're the little gang. They grow up together. They're the 4 that play in Strawberry Field. You know, they were the little group.
Mm-hmm.
John was seen as a bad influence. All the parents referred to him as that Lennon. We don't want you hanging around with that Lennon. He's trouble. So when it's Ivan's turn to go to high school, instead of going to Quarry Bank, which was the local school, his parents say, "Nah, you're not going to the same school as that Lennon."
Oh, wow.
And they send him all the way into Liverpool city centre, 5 miles away, to the Liverpool Institute, which is where he ends up in the class with the lad born on the same day as him, 18th of June, 1942, who's James Paul McCartney. So Ivan then becomes friends with Paul. It's Ivan says to Paul, "I know you love your music. My mate John's got this group. Do you want to come along and see them?"
Yeah.
And Ivan brings Paul, introduced him to John.
Yeah.
If you don't get Ivan, you don't get John and Paul, you don't get the Beatles.
Yeah.
That sort of sparked it. And I realised then, with a lot of these things we've talked about, here is that the turning points are huge. You know, we've all got what if moments in our life. My big
I was just going to say that.
Everybody knows what
have
they
those
are.
things.
We've got them.
Where we could have taken a different turn completely.
You know, what if I wasn't signed off work all those years ago?
Right.
I never would have done any of this.
Right.
You know, so we went through, and with my friend Andrew Phillips, we've been friends for years, and we would debate these things. We thought, why don't we put this into a book? So it covers the whole of the Beatles' career, and we picked out 70 key moments in Beatles history. And each one we say, okay, this is what did happen, but this could have happened. What do we think the outcome would have been? And the great thing is, the whole point of the book is, you know, read it, come up with your conclusion. Do you agree with us? It doesn't matter. It's your opinion, because it's things that didn't happen. So it's a bit of speculation, but it helps you understand what it takes to make this story happen. Key things like, what if they don't go to Hamburg? Well, Hamburg's where they learn to be a great band.
Right.
If they don't do that, they just fester around in Liverpool as one of 300 groups. That's how many groups there were in Liverpool.
Yeah.
But Hamburg makes them unique. What if they don't meet Brian Epstein? Without Brian, they don't get out of Liverpool. What if they don't meet George Martin? They would still have a recording career, but it wouldn't have been what they got with George. So some things, it could have been the end of the road. That would have been it. Something would be, you got away with that one. You can't do that. But others it would have been, okay, they still would have been successful, but.
Right.
You know, the one with Pete and Ringo. If they'd have kept Pete Best, would they still have been successful? Yes, they would. He was a very good drummer. But you wouldn't have some of his Ringoisms for a start. Yeah, you wouldn't have them.
That's right.
But you also would not have had one of the most creative, inventive drummers of the 20th century, who is still underrated for his contribution to the Beatles sound. It wasn't just his personality and those other bits. It's his drumming, his percussion, his style is so unique. That just fitted in absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
So the book has been so much fun to do. And it's almost like saying you can now buy a Beatles book with no definitive answers.
So that's the Beatles What If, and it's available now, right?
Yep.
Everywhere. So Amazon, wherever you buy books.
Oh, well, you can also come to BeatlesBookstore.com, which is another thing that I set up. I set up in COVID with a lot of my other author friends, because we couldn't go to events to sell our books. They'd all shut down. So we just set up an online store. And we got over a dozen different authors on there. A very unique blog as well by a guy called John Bazzini, who has the biggest collection of Beatles books in the world. But it's not just books, he's got recordings. It's phenomenal. Right. So he does a blog for us as well. I blog on there as well. And you can buy these books directly from the authors. So you go into BeatlesBookstore.com. You can find me in my books.
So the first trip to Hamburg didn't end all that well.
As an understatement.
George got deported because he turned out he was underage. Pete and Paul were arrested and jailed and deported. And there was a real chance that could have been the end of the story, right? That's probably one of your what if moments.
Definitely is.
Paul's dad made him go out and find a job. So what was the job? Do you know?
Yeah, he was with a company called Massey and Coggins, and they were coil winders.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and so he was actually, he thought, no. First of all, he was doing deliveries on a truck over Christmas, but then he was doing his armature coil winding. But he was told, maybe brushing the yard now, but he could be management material. And John came to him one day and said, "What the hell are you doing?" He said, "Well, no, I could get management here." Stop being stupid. We've got gigs. Come on.
Oh, wow.
That didn't last long. But yeah, it was an absolute disaster. The Hamburg, again, it was them getting big-headed. They had this cocky arrogance about them because they knew they'd suddenly become absolutely brilliant. They were packing the clubs in. Nobody could touch them. And they wanted to go to a bigger club, the top 10. So they thought, that's fine. We'll just go and quit. Well, Bruno Koschmider, who'd taken them out there, paid for them. He couldn't get them work visas, which was a big problem. And he said, well, you've got a contract. You can only work for me. You cannot work for anybody else, particularly in Hamburg. And they said, we're the Beatles. We can do what we want. Well, they thought they could. So they walk out on Koschmider and go to play at the top 10. Koschmider just mentions to the police, well, you do your curfew round at the nights. You go to the top 10. There's a 17-year-old called George Harrison. Now, the police would go there, and originally we thought he was deported. What it turned out was he was given a warning, which was, we shall be back here every night. We know you're not 18. If you're still on stage again, we shall arrest you. Oh, I'm going home. So before he's arrested, George goes home.
An unofficial deportation.
Yeah. So he was given the option. Pete and Paul went back to the horrible digs where they were living at the Bambino. And for a laugh, they put a condom on the wall, set fire to it, and maybe left a little scorch mark. They grab all their belongings and head off. So Koschmider rings the police and said, they've tried to burn down my cinema. And so Pete and Paul are arrested, put in the cells, taken in handcuffs, put onto a plane, and sent back home and told not to come back. So then you've got John and Stuart left. Stuart's fallen in love with Astrid, already got engaged. John thinks, well, there's no point me staying here. So John gets on a train, he gets his way home. John went home and went to bed. George didn't know the others had come back. Again, this is where Mona Best and Alan Williams step in.
You're right.
Yeah, and Mona says, well, if you're doing that well and the reports are great, play at the Casbah. And that's where John gets them all together. And they play at the Casbah. So really, the one at the Jacaranda was the first time as the Beatles. It's like a rehearsal come gig.
Right.
Coming back from Hamburg as the Beatles, this great rock and roll band, first place they play is the Casbah on the 17th of December 1960. But Alan Williams gets them into a gig at Litherland Town Hall. That's the gig that everything changes. Because they're in North Liverpool where nobody knows them. Because the Beatles wasn't the known name, nobody knew who they were, so it was just direct from Hamburg.
Right. The
Beatles, and they thought they were a German group.
Right.
Oh, don't you speak good English? No, we're from Liverpool. But they haven't got Stuart Sutcliffe. So one of the guys I found when I was doing Liverpool was Chas Newby. And Chas Newby is the first left-handed bass player in the Beatles. Before Paul, for those 4 gigs over the Christmas 1960. And suddenly they realise they're doing something different to every other group. All the promoters want them. They book them up and they know they're good. And with a bit of help from Eckhorn over in Hamburg, Alan Williams and Mona Best, they get the Beatles back to the top 10 club. And off they go. And George Harrison said their peak for performing live as a group was the top 10 in Hamburg in 1961. Said it was great. We could choose the songs we wanted to do. It was a brilliant venue. Echo on the microphones, good PA equipment, everything. So that's when we were at our peak. So that's before we become famous.
They went 3 times. Is that right?
No. Keep going.
4, 5?
5. Yeah.
5 times.
Right. 5 times. Yeah, so they go in August 60 through to December. They go back from April to July in 61. Then they go, so that's the start of the Indra, went to the Kaiserkeller, came home, went back for the top 10 in 61. They go back then in April 62 to open the Star Club. It becomes the great venue in Hamburg. They play there in April and May 62. Then they go back in the November with Ringo. And then at the end of December 62, again with Ringo. But then they do then go back one further time for a 6th visit, which was 1966.
Yeah.
When they're on top of the world, the final world tour, they go back to Hamburg and play there.
Nice. So that last trip, they've got a record. I mean, they're recording artists by then, 1962.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
And they were quite fed up. They didn't want to go back to Hamburg again.
I would think so.
Because I think we've done Hamburg. You know, the key moment, and again, this is another what if, is June 61. They make the record My Bonnie with Tony Sheridan.
Right.
Which they didn't particularly like. But it's a great fun rock and roll from an old Scottish folk song. But that record has the fans going into Brian Epstein's record store and asking for My Bonnie by the Beatles, which gets him to Brian's attention, which gets him to the cavern, and he becomes the manager. So without My Bonnie is the most important record for the Beatles. Because that gets them to Brian Epstein, gets from Brian Epstein to George Martin, and gets him into the studio and a record deal.
And Mona Best was kind of managing them at the time.
A lot of 61, yeah.
Right. And she was glad to turn them over to Brian Epstein because she was expecting, right?
Yeah. She was pregnant. She couldn't do more than promote the Casbah and a few local venues in 61. She did what she could, but
she tried to get him on TV.
Tried everything. Yeah. She told Grenada she'd come and see these. So she was great for the ideas. Did an amazing job with the Casbah, but couldn't do more than that. You know, people like Sam Leach. You know, Sam was a great promoter. He wanted to manage the Beatles, and they'd almost sort of got to the stage of shaking hands on it when Brian steps in, and Brian becomes the manager. You know, and Sam again became a really good friend of mine. And Sam knows he could not have got the Beatles out of Liverpool. Brian's the only guy who could.
Interesting.
So it's all these key moments before they become famous.
Right. So there was a falling out, Mona Best, over some wages at one point, right?
Oh yeah, that was back in '59.
That was way back in '59.
Yeah. That's when they were the Quarrymen had been playing for about 10 weeks.
And like one of the band was sick.
Yeah, Ken Brown, who I was talking about before.
Play.
He wasn't well, so he sat in the door and he took ticket money.
Right.
And at the end of the night, Mona came and gave them out their quarter share of their fee. And John and Paul said, well, hang on. Ken didn't play. We played. It should be split 3 ways.
Yeah.
And it was a matter of shillings. It wasn't a massive amount of money. But a point of principle. And what they learned that night was, you do not stand up to Mona Best and win. She was only little, but she was a powerhouse. And they tried to say, right, if we don't get Ken's money, we're out of here. We won't play her again. Said, okay, good, get out. And that's it, they were gone.
Well, they kind of made it up then.
Yeah.
So that's good. But then, in '62 they kicked Pete Best out of the band. So that couldn't have gone over very well with her.
Not at all. Yeah, obviously she was really upset, and particularly the way it was done as well.
Yeah.
One of my subsequent books, Finding the Fourth Beatle, I actually revealed for the first time what had happened. And one of the biggest stories which came as a shock when I uncovered it was from 1962, we were told that Pete Best was sacked.
Yeah.
And he wasn't.
He wasn't?
Nope.
He quit?
In a way. He was tricked. How do you sack somebody? Well, you have to employ them, don't you?
Right.
Who employed him?
Because
it wasn't Brian.
Let's see. Was it Mona?
Nope.
Was it? It wasn't Alan Williams. He's not in the picture anymore.
Nope.
I give up.
Nobody. You see, the problem was, and I only uncovered this by interviewing Brian Epstein's lawyer. And he explained it all to me. And he said,
well, what happened?
We've all been told since '62 that Brian Epstein brought Pete into the office and fired him. Well, Brian couldn't fire him because he didn't employ him.
Right.
The Beatles employed Brian.
Right.
As their manager. So Brian has no authority to sack Pete.
Right.
But nobody else employs him because John, Paul, George and Pete, in legal terms, are a partnership.
Right.
And under UK law, you cannot sack a partner. You have to dissolve the partnership legally. And what I also uncovered was that at the end of 1961, John, Paul, George and Pete had signed with a lawyer to become a legal partnership.
Oh, really?
I interviewed the lawyer who drew that up.
Oh,
fascinating. So in legal terms, nobody's got the power to sack anybody. So knowing that you have to put your head around the other way and think, okay, so if Brian hasn't sacked him,
right,
and the other three can't sack him, what happened? So we look at what Pete remembers and what Brian remembered, and it's virtually word for word identical. Brian says to him, the boys want you out, and it's been agreed that Ringo's going to join on Saturday. Nobody ever told him he was fired.
So did they dissolve the partnership?
Nope. The partner said they want him out. And the Ringo's
partnership agreement.
Yeah.
Let them do that?
Yeah, because they hadn't told me he was out. He wasn't no longer a partner. They just said Ringo's replacing you. Mm-hmm. Now, Pete's not a lawyer. He just thinks I've been fired. But actually he's still a partner. So what they then got to do is to trick Pete into quitting. So Brian's friend Joe Flannery is a promoter putting together a new band. Lee Curtis and the All-Stars. Joe Flannery invites Pete to join that new group. Pete says yes and quits the Beatles.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Pete
Wow.
gets wrong legal advice, and Pete's solicitor tries to sue Brian for wrongful dismissal,
Right?
which of course he can't do because
He can't do because
he didn't employ him, so he can't have dismissed him.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, yeah, that's how they got Pete out of it, was to trick him into thinking he was being fired and legally get him to join another group. And by joining that, he quits the partnership. And so the new partnership of John, Paul, George and Ringo
Yep.
can carry on.
Wow. That's quite a story.
Yeah.
Nice work.
That's the kind of stuff I get up to.
I know. So, well, Ringo didn't really go over that well with the fans.
Oh, no.
At first. No, because Pete was very popular.
Very popular indeed.
And in fact, the stories are that he was too popular, right? And he was overshadowing the other Beatles, and they were jealous. And
That's all secondary stuff.
yeah,
They all had plenty of girls. That was not a problem
right.
at all. But Pete was sort of the most popular with the girls.
Uh-huh.
But that in itself wasn't an issue. What you're telling me, oh, this is a detriment because one of our members is bringing lots of more fans to see us. Oh, we can't have that. We're a band. He's an asset.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but there were protests. Brian didn't go anywhere on his own. He felt threatened. He had a bodyguard.
Wow. Yeah.
And on the first and only film footage of the Beatles at the Cavern, which was done on the 22nd of August of 62, and they do Some Other Guy.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to the crowd, there are people saying, Pete best forever, Ringo never.
Oh, wow.
So it was not a popular decision. And George Harrison took a black eye.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was known that he was behind it. He was the main guy pushing for Ringo.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and he got a black eye for his trouble at the Cavern.
Sad.
Great story, though, isn't it? That's the thing about the story of the Beatles. There's so much to it. And we haven't even got to the end of 1962 yet.
No, I know. So they go to London to audition for George Martin. This is early 1962, right?
June 62, yeah.
Okay. And the first time they go, Pete Best is with them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's when George Martin decides he wants to use a session drummer, right?
Yeah.
So it really was no slight against Ringo. It was kind of a slight against Pete that he wanted to use a session drummer, wasn't it?
It's both. So for Pete, this is when you ignore all the myths and all the other silly things about haircuts and popularity and all that kind of stuff. It was quite straightforward. George Martin, at the end of the session, says to Brian, don't mind what you do with them as a group. But if I give you a contract, and it was still a big if, for making the record, I'll bring in a session drummer. That was standard practice. But Brian didn't know that. He was a record retailer. He sold records. He was not in the recording industry. So when he says to John, Paul and George, if we get the contract, and this was their last chance for contract, by the way, if we get the contract, the producer doesn't think Pete's good enough to play on the record. And they think, well, if we get this contract and the producer doesn't think he's good enough, we need to get another drummer. It was that simple. It's been complicated and mythologized and all that kind of stuff for years. And when you look at it simply like that, it makes sense. Because the young lads, the thing they want more than anything else is a record contract.
Right.
And now they've met this posh guy who's saying, I might give you a record. If he doesn't think that Pete's up to it, they feel they've got to get another drummer. And that's what they do. And they don't just say, wow, we love Ringo, we'll get Ringo. Ringo was just one of 4 drummers who were asked.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
3 of them said no. Ringo said yes.
Another what if moment.
It is a big one because, again, history's been rewritten to cover up all of that, to make it like it was always going to be Ringo replacing Pete. It wasn't.
Right.
But what I always say is it would never have worked as well with any other drummer than Ringo.
Right.
So as ever, and it always seemed to happen in Beatles history, whenever they needed to make a change to get whatever direction they were going to, they always found the right person at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Ringo then joins. They go down for the first recording test with George Martin in September, on the 4th of September. George Martin's expecting Pete Best to walk through the door. Think, hang on, who's this guy? Oh, we got another drummer.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, let's just run through the songs. And he wanted to do this Mitch Murray song, How Do You Do It?
Right.
Which they practiced and they didn't like. But they did, I don't know, 16 or 17 takes of Love Me Do with Ringo. Put them onto acetate for George Martin to listen to, and he listens and thinks, no, he can't do it either. I'm still going to use a session drummer. So the following week, the 11th of September, John, Paul, George and Ringo walk into the studio. Nobody thought to mention to Ringo that he's getting replaced by a studio drummer. He walks out, hang on, who's that guy setting up drums over there? And it's Andy White, a session drummer who's used to working at EMI.
Mm-hmm.
And so they then do the recording, and Ringo gets to play tambourine on Love Me Do.
Right.
Not very happy. It took him years to forgive George Martin for that one.
Yeah.
And so for the first single, they've got Andy White's version of Love Me Do. Mm-hmm. On the B-side, P.S. I Love You, again, with Andy White playing on it. The single comes out, and by mistake, they actually release the version with Ringo on it. So Ringo's version of Love Me Do. And even on Anthology, Ringo was saying, I didn't appear on the Beatles' first single, and it really angered me. But actually, he did. He wasn't supposed to, but he did.
He wasn't supposed to.
No. So any of the future versions that came out, like on the Please Please Me album and stuff, it was always Andy White's version.
Right.
And you can tell the difference because the tambourine.
The tambourine. Yeah. That's quite a story.
Yeah.
All right. So there were recordings made in at the Star Club.
Yeah.
In 1962, and they came out on vinyl in like 1977, and they're very, very, very rough.
Yeah.
Very rudimentary. Do you think we'll ever see those cleaned up and re-released?
Funny you should say that.
Yeah? You working on that?
My friend is.
Your friend is?
Yeah, I've listened to them, and they're launching next month.
What?
Yep.
What are they launching? What's going on?
It's going to come out as, I think it's a 4 CD box set.
Are you kidding me?
No.
I'm glad I asked.
And I've listened to the cleaned up versions, and they've done an amazing job with them.
Oh my gosh. That's very good news.
Yeah. So they are coming up. But, and I said this to my friend Nigel when he played them to me, he said, I love them, but I still like the originals.
the original. Yeah. I have the originals. It's like, somebody put a tape recorder in a club. It's a
king size Taylor.
It's not through a PA system, right?
It's one microphone just hanging there. Dude.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I love them.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Rubber Soul. Do you think we'll ever see a deluxe Rubber Soul?
Oh, they've
release?
got to. They've got to.
It hasn't happened yet.
They've still been working in reverse order, haven't they? They've been messing around.
Yeah.
They're not going to miss that opportunity. And I think it was such an important album.
Yeah.
It marked a sea change in their songwriting.
Yep.
And I think it's one of those that maybe gets overshadowed a bit by Sgt. Pepper and Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
Rubber Soul is such an important album.
Right.
Just that change in the songwriting style.
Right.
And how they were approaching it. And I think still one of those things that people don't appreciate as much is that really in only 7 years of releasing albums, every album was different.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't stick to one genre.
Right.
You try and find another band who's prepared to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And every time and Rubber Soul, that was a hell of a leap. And then Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you go in 4 years from Love Me Do to Tomorrow Never Knows. In 4 years.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
It's
cool.
But how do you go from A Hard Day's Night to Tomorrow Never Knows in 2 years?
Right.
A Hard Day's Night soundtrack, I still think it's one of the Beatles' best albums. I
Mm-hmm.
love it. A great acoustic album, some fantastic songs in there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only 2 years later that we get Revolver.
Yeah.
I mean, that's phenomenal progress. And they were still touring. They don't...
through 66.
Yeah, they don't quit touring. And that's one of those great coincidences, again, with dates. They opened the Casbah, 29th of August, 1959. The last performance, 29th of August, 1966. Candlestick Bar. 7 years to the day.
That's funny. Yeah.
That's how my brain works. I just make these connections with things. And it's funny that one of the songs they would have done at the Casbah was Long Tall Sally.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is one of the songs they played when Paul auditioned for John, when they met in 57.
Yeah.
The final song they played at Candlestick Park was Long Tall Sally.
That's nice. It's a good story. What about these biopics that are coming out?
Yeah.
In a couple of years. How do you feel about those? Do you have anything to do with those? Or
no, I'm not connected to those, apart from the road closures, because they've been filming here for the last 3 or 4 weeks. So they've had John's house at Mendips has been cordoned off. They've been filming there. They've been around at Paul's house at Forthling.
Wow, they're actually doing it on location.
Yeah,
it's nice.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, if you look at Nowhere Boy, which was a good film, but they didn't use the authentic locations, and they conflated various bits of the story.
Right.
Which, unless you're a nerd like me, maybe doesn't make as much difference. But there was a conversation in Quarrybank School where John is having a conversation with Pete Shotton, Nigel Wally, and Ivan Vaughan about the Quarrymen. Oh, and so Nigel Wally was not at Quarrybank, he was at the Blue Coat. Ivan Vaughan and Len Gary were at the Institute, and the other guys were at Quarrybank. But for the purposes of that scene, they're all in the same school.
Yeah. I can see where that would bother you.
Yeah. So it's simple stuff like that.
Right. Anything else you want to tell us about what you're working on?
I've also done a couple of documentary films. So did Looking for Lennon, which came out in 2018.
Okay.
It's the only Lennon documentary where we went back and we interviewed all the people who knew John. There's so many documentaries where they bring in celebrities to talk about, wasn't John great for this and that? Now, we spoke to the people who knew John.
Yeah.
And some of those have passed on now, so it will never be repeated. And that's still, so I love that film. That was a great privilege to work on that.
So where can we see that, David?
So you can buy it on DVD. It's in this country, it's on Amazon, so it might still be on Amazon for you as well. So Looking for Lennon.
Okay.
Another one that came out last year and is now in the US is called No Hamburg, No Beatles. And that tells the amazing story of the Beatles going to Hamburg. And we've got some great interviews in there, great archive footage, and my role was archive producer and research. So that's now available in the US as well.
Good.
Just finished a movie called Blackbird, which will be coming out in the US later this year, which is particularly looking at the importance of Lord Woodbine. So you've got that to come.
Okay.
A stage play we did at the end of last year I was involved in, which came out of No Hamburg, No Beatles. So we did that called Shake It Up Baby. And we just ran it for a couple of weeks in Liverpool, and it was so successful. So we're looking at expanding that.
They're good.
And I consult on various things. So
you get, don't you have a novel of some kind?
Yeah, it's one of the books we did. Yeah, it's called Inspector Rock.
Right.
That'll be the day that I die. And it's a fictional murder, but based around Beatles history. So the Beatles themselves and the other people around it, the Jacaranda, appear in the story.
That's hilarious.
So I based it around, it's at the Jacaranda around middle of 1960. and around the time when they back Janice the Stripper at the strip club for a week, at the strip club that Lord Woodbine and Alan Williams owned.
I wasn't going to bring that up.
Yeah, why not?
That is quite a story.
It's amazing. Yeah.
This is after they got back from Hamburg, right?
No,
this is before. It's after they got back from Scotland. Got it.
Back from Scotland.
Right.
And they haven't got many gigs. And Woody and Alan had set up this illegal strip club. And the stripper came in from Manchester, a classy bird, as we call her, because she wouldn't strip to records. She needed live music.
Yeah.
So Alan and Woody think, well, they got nothing else to do. And Paul's quote was, "We took the money just for the indignity of it."
Yeah, yeah.
And because they were in between drummers, Paul played drums. So it was John, Paul, George, and Stuart on this little stage. And Janice comes over with the sheet music and says, "These are the songs I want you to play." And said, "We can't read music."
Yeah.
So it said, "You just get whatever instrumentals we know."
And they were mortified. Paul especially.
Yeah, he said,
He's like,
"You want to be professional musicians?"
Well, they're embarrassed too. I mean,
Exactly.
They're a little, even though they haven't been to Hamburg yet.
You've not been to Hamburg yet.
Right.
No, so George is very, very innocent.
Yeah.
And she makes a beeline for him. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And at the end, they say, "That's it, Alan. We're professional musicians now. We're never playing a strip club again." And he said, "I know, which is fair enough." And they didn't for 2 months till they went to Hamburg. And then the middle of Stripland. You know, it's the biggest vice area and red light area in Europe.
Yeah.
That opened their eyes. I think John's phrase was, "We were born in Liverpool, but we grew up in Hamburg."
Right. That'd do it to you, I would think.
That'd do it.
David, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's been a thrill.
It's been good fun.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so if you want to keep in touch with everything I'm doing, just go to davidabedford.com.
Mm-hmm.
Nice and simple, davidabedford.com. And that has links to my books and everything else.
Your podcast.
Yep, and everything else I'm doing.
Good, cool.
When I get a life.
Yeah.
Whatever one of them is.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on and love your work and best of everything to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dale. Absolute pleasure.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, David. Bye now.
And sadly, that's the end of our talks with David Bedford, a tireless researcher into Beatles history and a really fun guy to talk to. Be sure to check out David's websites, davidabedford.com and beatlesbookstore.com, and you can also follow David on X at @LilyPoolDave. And check out David's movies, Looking for Lennon and No Hamburg, No Beatles, which you can find on Amazon or on a streaming service near you. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Morganza.